r/petty revenge landlord abandoned me at graduation, so I ruined his charity event. Abandoned, how my landlord destroyed my graduation day, and how I destroyed him back. The text came at 7:43 a.m. on what was supposed to be the best day of my life. Asterisk, hey kiddo, so sorry but I totally forgot I have a golf thing this morning. You'll figure something out. Congrats on graduating. Smiling face with smiling eyes, asterisk. I stared at my phone screen, reading those words over and over as my coffee went cold in my hands. My cap and gown hung on the closet door, pressed and ready. My graduation ceremony started at 10 a.m. It was Sunday morning, all rideshare prices were surged to hell, and I had exactly $23 in my checking account after scraping together last month's rent. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that I actually believed Richard Martinez when he said I was like family to him. For 3 years, I'd rented the tiny converted garage behind his pristine suburban house. 3 years of him watching me stumble home at 2 a.m. from my overnight shift at the diner, still in my uniform, exhausted beyond belief. 3 years of him seeing me hunched over textbooks at the kitchen table through his back window, surviving on ramen and sheer determination. When my beat-up Honda finally gave up the ghost last month, transmission shot, repair costs more than the car was worth, he'd seen me break down crying in his driveway. Don't worry, mija, he'd said, using the Spanish endearment he knew made me feel less alone in the world since my parents died. You've worked so hard for this degree. I'll drive you to graduation myself. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Richard owned 3 rental properties and drove a BMW. His golf membership cost more than I made in 6 months at my 2 part-time jobs combined. He could have rescheduled. He could have called an Uber for me. He could have done literally anything except abandon me via text message with 2 hours notice. I called him. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. By 8:15, I was in full panic mode. I'd already called every friend I could think of, most lived hours away now, or had their own family obligations. The few local numbers I tried either didn't answer or couldn't help on such short notice. One girl I barely knew from my economics class actually laughed when I called her, like I was asking for a kidney instead of a ride. At 9:30, I was still sitting in my graduation outfit in that cramped garage apartment, watching the minutes tick by on my phone. The ceremony I'd dreamed about for years was starting in 30 minutes, and I was stuck. Completely, utterly stuck. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19, right before my sophomore year. I almost dropped out then, the grief was suffocating, and without their financial support, college seemed impossible. But I stayed. I worked doubles at the diner, I cleaned offices at night, I tutored kids for $10 an hour. Every semester was a battle to scrape together tuition, to keep my grades up while running on 4 hours of sleep, to prove that their sacrifice meant something. They'd never see me walk across that stage. Richard was supposed to be there in their place, the man who'd watched me fight for this moment day after day, year after year. Instead, I sat alone in my cap and gown, scrolling through the live stream on my laptop as strangers' names got called while mine passed by unheard. That's when I decided Richard Martinez was going to pay for this. And I knew exactly how to make it happen. The first thing I did was stop crying and start researching. I'd lived behind Richard's house for 3 years, which meant I'd overheard plenty of his phone calls through the thin walls of my garage apartment. Real estate deals, tenant complaints, and most importantly, his endless bragging about his charitable work to anyone who'd listen. Richard Martinez wasn't just a landlord, he was a man obsessed with his reputation. Within an hour of missing my graduation, I had his entire social media presence mapped out. LinkedIn profile highlighting his commitment to community service. Facebook posts about his involvement with the local youth mentorship program. Instagram photos of him glad-handing at charity galas, always tagged with humble bragging captions about giving back. But the crown jewel was his upcoming event, the 3rd annual Martinez Foundation charity auction, scheduled for next Saturday at the Riverside Country Club. The same country club where he was playing golf instead of keeping his promise to me. According to the event page I found, Richard had been promoting this thing for months. Local business leaders, city council members, even the mayor were expected to attend. The cause was supporting underprivileged youth in higher education. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. Tickets were $200 a plate, and the whole thing was designed to cement Richard's image as a pillar of the community. Perfect. I spent the next 3 days gathering intelligence. Richard thought I was just sulking about graduation. He'd even left a generic, sorry you're upset, note under my door, like I was a child having a tantrum instead of someone he betrayed on the most important day of my life. What Richard didn't know was that I'd been saving every text message, every conversation, every broken promise from the past 3 years. The times he'd raised my rent with 2 days' notice, claiming market rates, while I scrambled to find the extra cash. The winter when my heater broke and he took 6 weeks to fix it, telling me to just use more blankets, while I could see my breath inside my own apartment. The day I begged him to let me pay rent 3 days late because my work schedule got cut, and he'd threatened eviction until I broke down crying. I also started documenting everything I could about his other properties. A quick drive around town revealed some interesting details about the luxury apartments he advertised online. Peeling paint, broken railings, overgrown landscaping that screamed slumlord more than caring property manager. But I needed more than just evidence of his hypocrisy. I needed access to his precious charity event. That's where Maria Santos came in. Maria cleaned houses in Richard's neighborhood, including his pristine suburban palace twice a week. More importantly, she was the aunt of Tommy, one of the kids I tutored for extra cash. When I ran into her at the grocery store on Wednesday, still looking hollow-eyed and devastated, she immediately asked what was wrong. I told her everything. Maria's face grew darker with each detail. Turns out, Richard had a reputation among the service workers in his neighborhood too. Condescending comments, late payments for work, treating people like they were invisible. She'd watched me struggling for years and had always respected how hard I worked. That man thinks he's better than everyone, she said, shaking her head. Always acting like some big shot when he treats people like garbage. That's when she mentioned something that made my heart race. Her cleaning service had been hired to work Richard's charity event. Extra staff for the evening, including servers who'd be invisible to the guests but could move freely throughout the venue. You want to see what kind of man he really is? Maria asked, her eyes gleaming with the same anger I felt burning in my chest. I nodded. Then we're going to show everyone exactly who Richard Martinez really is. By Thursday evening, Maria and I had the bones of a plan, but I was starting to realize how many things could go catastrophically wrong. The charity auction was in 2 days, and Maria had confirmed I could work as temporary serving staff, cash under the table, no questions asked. Her cousin Rosa managed the catering crew and owed Maria a favor. I'd be invisible in a black uniform, just another server weaving between tables of Richard's wealthy friends while they bid on vacation packages and spa treatments to help underprivileged youth. But getting inside was only step one. What I planned to do once I was there was infinitely more complicated. You sure about this, Mija? Maria asked as we sat in her kitchen, spreading printed photos and documents across her table like we were planning a heist. This man, he has connections. Money. He could make trouble for you. I stared down at a screenshot of Richard's Instagram from that Sunday, him grinning on the golf course at the exact time I should have been walking across the graduation stage. The caption read, "Perfect morning for 18 holes. Sometimes you have to take time for yourself. Hashtag self-care, hashtag blessed." He already made trouble for me, I said quietly. The worst trouble he could make. The evidence I'd compiled was damning, but scattered. Text screenshots of his callous messages to tenants. Photos I'd taken of the deplorable conditions at his rental properties, the apartment building downtown where the front steps were literally crumbling, the duplex on Maple Street with windows held together by duct tape. Records I'd found through the county assessor's office showing the complaints filed against his properties that had mysteriously disappeared. Maria had contributed her own documentation, photos of Richard's house that she'd taken over the years, showing the stark contrast between how he lived and how he treated his tenants' homes. Pictures of him screaming at the landscaping crew when they'd accidentally damaged one of his precious rose bushes, the same week he told Mrs. Chen from the Maple Street duplex that he couldn't afford to fix her broken front door. But having evidence and effectively using it were two different things. I couldn't just stand up during dinner and start reading text messages. The security would have me out in 30 seconds, and Richard would spin it as a disgruntled tenant having a breakdown. I needed something bigger. Something public and undeniable. That's when I remembered Richard's ego. Every charity event he'd ever hosted followed the same pattern. I'd found photos and videos from previous years all over social media. Richard always gave a speech. Not just a brief welcome, but a full presentation about his dedication to helping others, complete with a slideshow of his charitable works. He'd project photos on the big screen at the front of the ballroom, images of smiling kids and grateful families, all while positioning himself as their savior. If I could get access to that presentation, replace his carefully curated images with the truth. The AV equipment, I said suddenly, looking up at Maria. Who handles the technical stuff for these events? Maria frowned, thinking. Rosa mentioned something about that. They bring in some local company, I think. Why? Because Richard's going to tell everyone what a generous, caring man he is. And I'm going to help him tell the real story. The next 18 hours were a blur of desperate phone calls and increasingly risky plans. I tracked down the AV company through the country club, a small local business run by a guy named Jake who graduated from my high school 2 years ahead of me. When I called him, pretending to be from Richard's office asking about updating the presentation materials, he was surprisingly helpful. Too helpful. He started asking detailed questions I couldn't answer, about file formats and timing cues and technical specifications that made it clear I had no idea what I was talking about. I was going to need a different approach. But as Friday night turned into Saturday morning, with the event just hours away, I still didn't have a foolproof way to hijack Richard's precious slideshow. I had the evidence. I had access to the venue. What I didn't have was a guarantee that any of this would work, or that I wouldn't end up arrested, sued, or worse. Richard had destroyed the most important day of my life with a casual text message. I was about to find out if I could return the favor. The morning of Richard's charity auction, I woke up at 5 a.m. with my heart hammering against my ribs. In 6 hours, I'd either pull off the most satisfying revenge of my life, or spectacularly destroy what little future I had left. I'd spent most of Friday night lying awake, running through every possible scenario. Best case, Richard's reputation crumbles in front of everyone who matters to him. Worst case, I get arrested for, what? Trespassing. Harassment. I honestly wasn't sure what laws I might be breaking, but I was pretty sure Richard's lawyer would figure something out. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria, *, Rosa says be at the country club kitchen entrance at 3 p.m. Wear all black, comfortable shoes. You sure about this? *. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, *, I'm sure. *. But I wasn't. Not really. The technical problem was still eating at me. I'd called Jake from the AV company again on Friday, this time pretending to be Richard's assistant asking about last-minute additions to the slideshow. He'd been polite but firm, all presentation materials had to be loaded and tested by 4 p.m., and any changes required Mr. Martinez's direct approval. I had copies of all my evidence saved on a flash drive, but no way to get them into Richard's presentation. Even if I could somehow access the AV setup during the event, I'd need passwords, file access, technical knowledge I simply didn't have. That's when my phone rang, and I saw a number I didn't recognize. Is this the girl asking about Richard Martinez's slideshow? My blood went cold. Who is this? Jake's little brother, Danny. I was at the shop yesterday when you called. There was a pause. Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but that guy Martinez? He's a complete asshole. He screamed at Jake for 20 minutes last month because the microphone had feedback for like 10 seconds. I sat up straighter. Okay. Jake told me someone was trying to mess with his presentation, and honestly. Good. That guy deserves whatever's coming to him. Another pause. I'll be working the event today. Running cables, monitoring equipment. If you happen to have some alternative materials, I might be able to help them find their way into the system. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why would you help me? Because Martinez owns the apartment my girlfriend lives in. When her ceiling started leaking last winter, he told her the water damage was her fault for creating too much humidity by cooking food. She had to move back in with her parents. This was it. This was the break I needed. What would you need from me? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Flash drive with whatever you want to show instead of his bullshit charity photos. I'll need it before 4 p.m., and you'll need to give me some kind of signal during his speech so I know when to make the switch. We agreed on the details quickly. I'd find him during setup and pass off the drive. When Richard got to the slideshow portion of his speech, I'd signal Danny from across the room. After I hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment looking at the evidence spread across my desk. Screenshots of Richard's cruel text messages. Photos of his neglected properties. Documentation of his broken promises. Tomorrow, everyone would know exactly who Richard Martinez really was. But as I started copying files onto the flash drive, a new worry crept in. What if this backfired? What if people blamed me instead of him? What if Richard found a way to turn this around, make himself the victim? I looked at the graduation cap still hanging on my closet door, and the worry faded. He'd stolen something from me that I could never get back. Now it was my turn. At 2:30 p.m., I stood in the parking lot of the Riverside Country Club, watching luxury cars stream through the entrance. BMWs, Mercedes, even a few Teslas. Richard's crowd was arriving early to schmooze before the main event. My hands were shaking as I clutched the flash drive in my pocket, and not from the cold. I dressed in all black like Maria instructed, black slacks, black button-down shirt, black shoes that were already giving me blisters. In the bathroom mirror that morning, I'd looked like I was dressed for a funeral. Maybe I was, the funeral of Richard Martinez's reputation. The kitchen entrance was around back, away from the valet stand and red carpet Richard had apparently insisted on. I found Maria's cousin Rosa directing a small army of catering staff, all of them moving with the practiced efficiency of people who knew exactly how invisible they needed to be. You must be the extra server, Rosa said, looking me up and down. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and calloused hands. Maria says you're good people. But this is a high-class event, Mija. These rich folks, they don't want to see you, hear you, or remember you exist. Can you handle that? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Good. You'll be working the main ballroom. Champagne service during cocktails, then water and wine during dinner. Keep your head down, move fast, don't drop anything. She handed me a small serving tray and a name tag that just read, server. And whatever personal business you have here tonight, handle it quietly. I can't afford to lose this contract. The weight of what I was about to do hit me like a truck. Rosa was trusting me, Maria was trusting me, and Danny from the AV company was risking his job. If this went wrong, I wouldn't be the only one paying the price. I made my way through the service corridors toward the main ballroom, trying to look like I belonged. The country club was even more opulent inside than I'd imagined, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, oil paintings that probably cost more than my entire college education. This was Richard's world, the world where he was respected and admired. The ballroom was massive, with round tables draped in white linen scattered around a raised stage at the front. A projection screen dominated the wall behind the podium, currently displaying the Martinez Foundation logo in elegant gold script. In a few hours, that screen would show a very different kind of presentation. If everything went according to plan. I spotted Danny near the stage, wrestling with a tangle of cables. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 19 or 20, with nervous energy that reminded me of myself. When he saw me approaching, he glanced around quickly before nodding toward a supply closet near the back wall. You have it, he asked in a low voice once we were alone. I pulled out the flash drive, my hand trembling slightly. Everything's labeled by category. Photos of the properties, text message screenshots, documentation of complaints. There's also an audio file, a voicemail he left Mrs. Chen threatening eviction if she didn't stop whining about her broken heater. Danny pocketed the drive. Jesus. This guy really is a piece of work. He paused. You sure you want to do this? Once I upload these files, there's no taking it back. This is going to be nuclear. I thought about that Sunday morning. About sitting in my cap and gown, watching other people live their dreams while mine slipped away. About Richard's golf photo, posted while I was crying alone in my apartment. He made sure I couldn't take back missing my graduation, I said quietly. He doesn't get to take this back either. Danny nodded grimly. All right. I'll swap out the files during setup. When he gets to the slideshow part of his speech, probably about 20 minutes in, based on previous years, catch my eye and tap your nose. That's when I'll make the switch. As I headed back to my serving duties, I caught sight of Richard himself for the first time that day. He stood near the entrance in an expensive tuxedo, greeting guests with the practiced charm of a politician. Warm handshakes, genuine-looking smiles, the kind of charisma that had convinced me he actually cared about my success. Watching him work the room, I felt a flicker of doubt. These people clearly respected him. What if they didn't believe the evidence? What if they thought I was just a disgruntled tenant making things up? But then I overheard his conversation with Mayor Davidson about his commitment to helping young people achieve their dreams, and the doubt evaporated. In 2 hours, everyone would see exactly how Richard Martinez helped young people achieve their dreams. The cocktail hour was a masterclass in controlled chaos. I weaved between tables with champagne flutes, invisible among the designer gowns and tailored suits, watching Richard hold court like the king of his carefully constructed kingdom. Every few minutes, someone would approach him with reverent praise for his generous spirit or dedication to the community. If they only knew. But my confidence started wavering when I spotted Councilman Peters and Judge Richardson at the same table, laughing at something Richard had said. These weren't just wealthy socialites, these were people with real power. People who could make my life very difficult if tonight went sideways. Excuse me, server. I turned to find a woman in pearls holding an empty glass. Could I get another champagne? Of course, I managed, grateful for something normal to focus on. As I headed back toward the bar, I nearly collided with someone coming around the corner, a tall man in an expensive suit who looked vaguely familiar. Careful there, he said, steadying my tray. Then his eyes narrowed. Wait, don't I know you from somewhere? My heart stopped. It was David Chen, Mrs. Chen's son. The one who'd helped his mother document all the maintenance issues Richard had ignored. If he recognized me and said something. I don't think so, I said quickly, lowering my voice and looking away. But I could feel his eyes following me as I hurried back to the service area. This was exactly what Rosa had warned me about. Staying invisible was harder than it looked. At 6:45, dinner service began, and the evening's program kicked into high gear. Richard took the stage to scattered applause, looking every inch the benevolent benefactor in his perfectly tailored tux. Welcome, friends, to the 3rd annual Martinez Foundation charity auction, he began, his voice carrying easily through the sound system. Tonight, we gather not just as neighbors and colleagues, but as a community united in our commitment to lifting up the next generation. I positioned myself near the back wall where I could see both Richard and Danny at the AV station. My hands were sweating so badly I could barely grip my water pitcher. Over the past year, the Martinez Foundation has helped 17 local students with emergency financial assistance, Richard continued, warming to his theme. We've provided scholarships, mentorship, and most importantly, hope to young people who might otherwise fall through the cracks. The irony was suffocating. I was one of those young people who'd fallen through the cracks, his cracks, specifically. That's when I noticed the man at table 6 frantically typing on his phone. Then the woman next to him leaning over to whisper something urgent. A ripple of hushed conversation started spreading through the room, people checking their phones with increasingly concerned expressions. Something was happening, and it had nothing to do with my plan. Richard noticed it too. His smooth delivery faltered for just a moment as he scanned the audience, clearly picking up on the shift in energy. As I was saying, he continued, but more people were reaching for their phones now. The distraction was spreading like wildfire through the ballroom. I caught Danny's eye across the room. He looked as confused as I felt, mouthing, "What's happening?" Then Mayor Davidson stood up from his front row table, his face grim as he made his way toward the exit, phone pressed to his ear. Whatever was going on, it was big enough to pull the mayor away from Richard's precious charity event. Part of me was relieved, maybe this distraction would make my revelation more impactful. But another part was terrified that I'd lose my window of opportunity entirely. Richard was visibly struggling to maintain control now, his practiced smile looking strained as more guests began murmuring among themselves. Perhaps we should move directly to tonight's presentation, he announced, abandoning whatever script he planned. I'd like to show you some images of the young people we've helped this year. This was it. My moment. I looked toward Danny and tapped my nose. Danny's face went pale as he looked from me to his equipment panel. He shook his head frantically and mouthed, "Problem." My stomach dropped. Through the murmur of distracted guests, I watched him gesture helplessly at his computer screen. Something was wrong with the AV system, I could see error messages flashing on his monitor from across the room. Richard, oblivious to the technical difficulties, continued his introduction. These images represent more than just statistics. They represent lives changed, futures secured, dreams made possible through community support. He clicked his presentation remote. Nothing happened. He clicked again, his practiced smile tightening slightly. Still nothing. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please direct your attention to the screen," Richard said, his voice carrying the first hint of strain I'd ever heard from him. The projection screen remained stubbornly dark. I watched Danny frantically typing, sweat beading on his forehead. Jake appeared beside him, the two brothers hunched over the equipment like surgeons trying to save a patient. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph, and instead everything was falling apart. Then Councilman Peters' phone rang, actually rang, not just buzzed, and he answered it right there at his table. "What do you mean, federal investigation?" he said loudly enough for half the room to hear. The word federal cut through the ballroom like a blade. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward Peters, who was now standing with his hand over his other ear, trying to hear over the sudden silence. "I need to take this," Peters announced to no one in particular, striding toward the exit with obvious urgency. Richard's composure finally cracked. Standing alone on stage with a dead microphone and a blank screen, watching his carefully curated audience dissolve into chaos, he looked less like a community pillar and more like a man watching his world collapse. "Perhaps we should take a brief intermission," he said, forcing that politician's smile back onto his face. "Technical difficulties, you understand." But half his guests were already pushing back from their tables, phones glued to their ears. Whatever news was breaking, it was big enough to eclipse Richard's precious charity auction entirely. I saw my opportunity slipping away like water through my fingers. All those weeks of planning, all that evidence carefully compiled, and I was going to lose everything to some random news crisis that had nothing to do with Richard or me or the justice I'd been craving. That's when I realized David Chen was walking straight toward me. "I knew I recognized you," he said quietly, stopping just close enough that other servers couldn't overhear. "You're the girl from the garage apartment behind Martinez's house. The one who helped document all those maintenance violations for my mother." My mouth went dry. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "No, I don't." His voice wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. "And I'm guessing you're not here tonight serving champagne because you love hospitality work." I glanced around desperately. Rosa was across the room directing cleanup of abandoned tables. Danny and Jake were still wrestling with their equipment. Richard had disappeared backstage, probably having his own crisis about his ruined presentation. "Look," David continued, "I don't know what you're planning, but whatever it is, tonight might not be your best shot. You see what's happening out there? 3 city council members just left. The police chief got a call that made him go white as a sheet. Something huge is going down." He was right, and I hated him for it. My perfectly orchestrated revenge was being upstaged by breaking news. "But," David said, lowering his voice even further, "if you've got evidence about Martinez that people need to see, there might be a better way to get it out there. Especially if tonight's news is what I think it is." "What do you mean?" David glanced around, then pulled out his phone. "My girlfriend works at Channel 7. She just texted me, they're about to break a story about a federal investigation into city housing violations and bribery. Multiple landlords, multiple officials." My heart started racing again, but for entirely different reasons. Martinez's name came up in the preliminary reporting. The words hit me like a physical blow. Federal investigation. Richard's involved. David nodded grimly. According to my girlfriend's sources, there's been a months-long investigation into a network of landlords who've been bribing city inspectors to ignore code violations. Martinez isn't the biggest fish, but his name's definitely on the list. I stared at him, my mind reeling. All this time I'd been planning my small, personal revenge while federal agents were building a case that could actually destroy Richard's life. My slideshow of text messages and photos suddenly seemed pathetically amateur. They're making arrests tonight, David continued. That's why everyone's phones are going crazy. The story breaks in about 30 minutes. Before I could process what this meant for my plan, Rosa appeared at my elbow looking stressed and irritated. What are you doing standing around talking? She hissed. Half the guests are leaving, the other half want their checks, and Mr. Martinez is backstage having some kind of meltdown about the AV system. Move. I grabbed my serving tray with shaking hands, but my mind was elsewhere. If Richard was about to be arrested, did my revenge even matter anymore? Or was this the perfect time to strike, when he was already vulnerable? As I mechanically collected abandoned wine glasses, I watched the ballroom continue its descent into chaos. Judge Richardson was in heated conversation with someone on his phone by the windows. The police chief had disappeared entirely. Even some of the servers were checking their phones, whispers of FBI and raids spreading through the staff. That's when I saw Danny frantically waving at me from across the room. He'd finally gotten the AV system working. I could see the Martinez Foundation logo glowing on the projection screen again. But his expression wasn't triumphant, it was panicked. I made my way over, dodging increasingly frantic guests and abandoned dinner plates. The files are uploaded, Danny whispered urgently, but I'm getting texts from my friends. They're saying the FBI is literally conducting raids across the city right now. Martinez's downtown property was hit 20 minutes ago. My stomach dropped. Does he know? Not yet, I don't think. He's been backstage trying to salvage this disaster. But when he finds out... Danny trailed off, both of us imagining Richard's reaction. That's when the ballroom doors burst open and Richard strode back in, his earlier composure replaced by barely controlled fury. His perfect hair was disheveled, his bow tie askew, and there was something wild in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice cutting through the chaos without a microphone. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Let's continue with tonight's presentation. Several guests tried to approach him, probably to warn him about the news, but he waved them off with sharp, dismissive gestures. He was laser-focused on getting his show back on track, oblivious to the fact that his world was already crumbling around him. Danny, I whispered, when he clicks that remote, what's going to show up? Everything. All your evidence, queued up and ready to go. He looked sick. But maybe we should abort this. If he's about to be arrested anyway. No. The word came out harder than I intended. He destroyed my graduation day because he thought I didn't matter. Federal charges are about money and corruption. This is about him being a cruel, heartless person who betrays people who trust him. I watched Richard approach the podium, straightening his jacket like he could restore order through sheer force of will. In a few seconds, he'd click that remote expecting to see heartwarming photos of grateful scholarship recipients. Instead, he'd see screenshots of his own cruelty projected for everyone who still remained to witness. Behind me, I could hear more guests receiving urgent phone calls. The net was closing around Richard from multiple directions, but he was too focused on controlling his precious event to notice. He raised the remote, smiled his politician's smile at the remaining crowd, and clicked. The projection screen flickered to life. The first image that flashed on the screen wasn't mine. Instead of Richard's cruel text messages or photos of his decrepit properties, a professional headshot of Richard himself appeared, but with a bright red "Under Federal Investigation" banner splashed across it. Below that, a news ticker scrolled, breaking, FBI raids multiple properties in housing corruption probe. The remaining guests gasped collectively. Someone's phone had somehow connected to the projection system, overriding whatever Danny had uploaded. Richard spun around to stare at his own face on the screen, his mouth falling open in shock. What the hell, he started, then stopped as he saw the words beneath his photo. The ballroom erupted. Chairs scraped against marble as the remaining guests shot to their feet, some rushing toward exits, others pulling out phones to capture Richard's reaction. I stood frozen with my serving tray, watching 3 years of planning evaporate into something much bigger and more terrifying than I'd ever imagined. Turn it off. Richard shouted at Danny, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Turn that goddamn thing off right now. But Danny was frantically pressing buttons with no effect. Someone else was controlling the feed now, and they weren't done. The screen switched to aerial footage of FBI agents in windbreakers carrying boxes out of a building I recognized, Richard's downtown rental property. Richard's face went white. Then red. Then a shade of purple I didn't know was humanly possible. That's when I noticed the man in the plain navy suit standing near the back entrance. He'd been there for a few minutes, I realized, quietly observing the chaos. His posture was too alert, too professional to be another panicked guest. When he started walking purposefully toward the stage, speaking into a small radio clip to his collar, my blood turned to ice. Federal agent. Had to be. Richard saw him too. For a split second, our eyes met across the ballroom, and I saw something that almost looked like recognition. Like he suddenly understood that his world hadn't just accidentally collapsed, it had been deliberately destroyed. This is all a mistake, Richard announced to the room, his voice cracking. Some kind of technical malfunction, clearly doctored footage. Mr. Richard Martinez. The agent's voice carried easily through the ballroom. He was close enough to the stage now that everyone could see his badge. FBI. I need to speak with you. The few remaining guests who hadn't already fled were now openly filming with their phones. Richard's charity auction had become a live-streamed federal arrest, and I was standing in the middle of it with evidence of his personal cruelty that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to federal corruption charges. But the projection screen wasn't done with its show. The image switched again, and this time I recognized the interface. It was Danny's system, but someone else was controlling it remotely. My carefully compiled screenshot started flashing on the screen, Richard's text about abandoning me on graduation day, photos of Mrs. Chen's broken ceiling, documentation of ignored maintenance requests. Someone had hacked the AV system and was broadcasting everything. Jesus Christ, Danny whispered beside me. That's not me doing that. Someone's in our system remotely. Richard was staring at the screen in horror as his own text messages appeared larger than life. Asterisk, hey kiddo, so sorry but I totally forgot I have a golf thing this morning. You'll figure something out. Congrats on graduating. Smiling face with smiling eyes, asterisk. The timestamp was clearly visible. So was the photo that followed, Richard on the golf course that same morning, grinning at the camera. Mr. Martinez, the FBI agent said again, more firmly. We need to talk. Now. But Richard wasn't listening. He was fixated on the screen, watching years of his carefully maintained reputation crumble in real time. When the projection switched to an audio file, Mrs. Chen's voicemail where he threatened eviction over her whining about heat, he actually stumbled backward. Someone's doing this on purpose, he said, his voice barely audible over the gasps from the crowd. Someone orchestrated all of this. His wild eyes swept the ballroom until they found me again. Even in my server's uniform, even trying to blend into the background, he knew. You, he breathed. That's when everything went sideways. Richard's finger was pointing directly at me across the chaos of the ballroom, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. You did this, he shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is all her. She's been planning this. Every head in the room turned toward me. The FBI agent. The remaining guests with their phones still recording. Rosa, whose face went ashen as she realized her favor for Maria was about to cost her everything. Danny, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his equipment rack. My legs felt like water. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to be invisible, watching from the sidelines as Richard's own words destroyed him. Instead, I was center stage in a federal investigation with dozens of witnesses and cameras capturing every second. Sir, I need you to calm down and come with me, the FBI agent said firmly, moving toward Richard. But Richard wasn't listening. He was advancing toward me, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor with each furious step. 3 years I gave you a place to live, he snarled, pointing at me like I was evidence in a trial. 3 years I was patient with your late rent, your sob stories, your constant problems. And this is how you repay me. By destroying everything I've built. The projection screen was still cycling through my evidence, photos of crumbling staircases, screenshots of his dismissive texts to elderly tenants, audio of him mocking Mrs. Chen's accent. Each new piece made the remaining guests murmur with disgust, but Richard only had eyes for me. Richard Martinez, you need to stop moving and speak with me immediately. The agent's voice had gone from professional to commanding, but Richard was in full meltdown mode. She's a liar, he screamed, still pointing at me. A vindictive little girl who couldn't handle missing some ceremony. Check her apartment, she probably has weeks of this planned out. Files, photos, recordings. My heart stopped. He was right, of course. My laptop was sitting on my desk in a garage apartment with folders full of evidence, research notes, screenshots of his social media accounts. If the FBI decided to investigate his claims about me orchestrating this. Mr. Martinez, final warning. The agent had his hand on something at his belt, not a gun, but definitely some kind of restraint. You're creating a public disturbance, and you're needed for questioning in a federal investigation. That's when Rosa appeared at my elbow, her face grim but determined. Come on, Mija, she whispered urgently. We're leaving. Right now. But as I turned to follow her, Richard's voice cut through the ballroom one more time, her real name is on the lease. The apartment behind my house. She documented everything because she's obsessed with me. The FBI agent's head snapped toward me with sudden interest. Our eyes met across the chaos, and I saw the exact moment he started putting pieces together. Young woman. Tenant. Documented evidence. Coordinated timing with federal arrests. Ma'am, he called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. I'm going to need to speak with you as well. Rosa's grip on my arm tightened. Around us, the last few guests were fleeing like the building was on fire. The projection screen was now showing a loop of Richard's most damning messages, completely out of anyone's control. Danny had given up trying to fix it and was packing his equipment with shaking hands. Run, Rosa whispered. But there was nowhere to go. The FBI agent was moving toward us, Richard was still ranting about my conspiracy, and I could hear more official voices coming through the kitchen entrance, backup arriving, or maybe more agents who'd been stationed outside. Everything I'd planned so carefully was spiraling into a nightmare that could destroy not just Richard, but me, Rosa, Maria, Danny, and anyone else who'd helped me. The projection screen flickered one final time, then went dark. In the sudden silence, I heard the distinctive click of handcuffs. But they weren't being put on me. Richard Martinez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit bribery, wire fraud, and violation of federal housing laws, the FBI agent announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the ballroom. I watched in shock as Richard's hands were pulled behind his back, the silver handcuffs glinting under the crystal chandeliers. His face had gone completely white, all the rage draining out of him as the reality of his situation finally sank in. This is a mistake, he said weakly, but the fight had gone out of his voice. I want my lawyer. You'll have that opportunity, the agent replied professionally. Then his eyes found mine again across the chaos of overturned chairs and abandoned dinner plates. Ma'am, I still need to speak with you. Rosa's grip on my arm was cutting off circulation, but I couldn't move. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph, watching Richard's reputation crumble as his own cruelty was exposed. Instead, I felt like I was watching a car accident in slow motion, and I was about to become part of the wreckage. Agent Morrison, a voice called from the kitchen entrance. Another FBI agent appeared, a woman in a dark suit carrying a tablet. We've got the warrant for the secondary property, and the tech team needs to discuss the AV system breach. My blood turned to ice. The AV system breach. Someone had hacked into Danny's setup to broadcast all my evidence, but it wasn't Danny, and it wasn't me. Which meant someone else, someone with serious technical skills, had been watching this whole thing unfold. Agent Morrison nodded at his colleague, then looked back at me. Miss, I'm going to need your name and contact information. You're not under arrest, but given your apparent connection to Mr. Martinez and the timing of tonight's presentation, we have some questions. She's just temporary serving staff, Rosa said quickly, stepping slightly in front of me. She doesn't know anything about Mr. Martinez's business dealings. Ma'am, with respect, that's not for you to determine. Morrison's voice remained professional, but there was steel underneath. The evidence displayed tonight suggests intimate knowledge of Mr. Martinez's rental properties and tenant communications. That level of documentation doesn't happen by accident. Around us, the ballroom was emptying fast. The few remaining guests were practically running for the exits, probably terrified of being associated with whatever federal case was unfolding. Danny had finished packing his equipment and was trying to slip out unnoticed, but I could see another agent intercepting him near the service entrance. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from an unknown number, back exit. Now. Trust me. I stared at the message, my heart hammering. Who else knew I was here? Who else was involved in this? I live in Mr. Martinez's rental property, I said carefully, meeting Agent Morrison's eyes. If I documented maintenance issues or poor living conditions, it's because I live there. That's not a conspiracy, that's being a tenant. It was true, as far as it went. But it was also a massive oversimplification that ignored weeks of planning, surveillance, and coordination with multiple people to orchestrate tonight's disaster. Morrison studied my face for a long moment. And the timing? Your evidence appearing during a federal investigation, at his charity event, just as we're executing search warrants. Before I could answer, the lights in the ballroom flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. In the confusion, I felt Rosa's hand slip from my arm. When the main lights came back on 10 seconds later, I was standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by FBI agents, with Rosa nowhere to be seen. And my phone was buzzing again, window of opportunity closing. Move. I stared at my phone screen, my hands shaking under the emergency lighting. The text felt like a lifeline, but taking it would mean fleeing a federal crime scene. Not taking it might mean becoming a federal defendant myself. Agent Morrison was coordinating with his team in hushed, urgent voices. Something about coordinated cyber attack and real-time system infiltration. They were starting to understand that tonight's disaster wasn't just my amateur revenge plot, someone with serious technical capabilities had hijacked the whole operation. Miss, Morrison called out, turning back to me. I'm going to need you to. The projection screen suddenly blazed back to life, cutting him off mid-sentence. But instead of my evidence, it now displayed something that made my blood freeze, security camera footage of me entering the country club through the kitchen entrance, timestamp clearly visible. Then footage of me talking to Danny by the AV equipment. Then me signaling across the room during Richard's speech. What the hell? Danny's voice carried from across the ballroom where another agent had been questioning him. That's not from our system. Someone's accessing external cameras. Every agent in the room was now staring at the screen as it played a perfect chronological account of my evening, arriving in server's uniform, coordinating with Danny, positioning myself for the perfect view of Richard's presentation. To anyone watching, it looked like textbook premeditation. My phone buzzed again, they have everything. Cameras, digital forensics, your apartment will be next. This is your last chance. Ma'am, step away from your phone please, Agent Morrison said, his voice sharp with suspicion. Hands where I can see them. That's when the fire alarm started blaring. The piercing sound sent everyone into immediate action, agents speaking rapidly into radios, Danny frantically checking if his equipment had caused an electrical issue, someone shouting orders I couldn't make out over the deafening noise. In the chaos, I felt a hand grab my elbow. Not roughly, but firmly. This way, a quiet voice said. Now. I turned to see David Chen, Mrs. Chen's son, the one who'd recognized me earlier. His expression was grim but determined as he guided me toward a side exit I hadn't noticed before. Wait, I protested, but he was already moving, weaving between confused agents and scattered chairs. I can't just leave. Yes, you can. The fire alarm will buy us maybe 3 minutes before they lock down the building completely. He pushed open a service door that led to a narrow corridor. My girlfriend isn't just a reporter, she's also the one who's been helping federal investigators trace digital evidence for months. My mind reeled as we hurried down the corridor. Your girlfriend is FBI cyber crimes consultant. She's been monitoring the investigation into housing corruption, and when she saw tonight's guest list, she recognized your name from her mother's complaints about Martinez. We reached another door, this one leading to a loading dock. She's been watching the whole thing unfold through security feeds. The cool night air hit my face like a slap. David's car was running in the shadows beyond the loading dock, driver's side door open. A woman with short dark hair sat behind the wheel, laptop balanced on her knees. Get in, she called out. Federal backup is 30 seconds out. This is insane, I said, but I was already moving toward the car. I can't flee a federal investigation. That makes everything worse. You're not fleeing, David said, pushing me gently toward the back seat. You're accepting protective custody from someone who understands exactly what evidence they have and what it means. As we pulled away from the country club, I could see multiple FBI vehicles racing toward the main entrance, their red and blue lights painting the elegant facade in harsh, official colors. They have security footage of everything I did tonight, I said weakly. David's girlfriend, I still didn't even know her name, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. They have security footage of you doing your job as temporary serving staff and getting caught up in a federal arrest. The AV system breach. That wasn't you. The remote camera access. Also not you. Someone else turned your personal vendetta into a federal showcase, and right now, you're a witness, not a suspect. But Richard saw me, he knows I planned. Richard Martinez is facing 20 years in federal prison for corruption charges that have nothing to do with you, she interrupted. His word against yours, and his credibility just evaporated on live television. My phone buzzed with another unknown text, well played. He had it coming. I stared at the message as we drove through the dark streets away from the country club. Someone else had been pulling strings tonight, using my evidence as ammunition for a much bigger takedown. The question was, who? And what did they want from me now? The car pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot 15 minutes from the country club, and David's girlfriend finally turned around to face me properly. She had sharp, intelligent eyes and a kind of focused intensity that made me understand why the FBI would want her expertise. "I'm Sarah," she said simply. "And we need to talk before this gets any more complicated." Inside the diner, she spread printouts across our corner booth while David kept watch by the windows. The documents made my stomach drop, screenshots of my social media, copies of my lease agreement with Richard, even photos of my college graduation livestream that I'd watched alone in my apartment. "Someone's been building a profile on you for weeks," Sarah said quietly. "The same someone who hacked tonight's AV system and fed your evidence into what was supposed to be a routine federal arrest." "That's impossible. Nobody knew what I was planning except Maria, Rosa, Danny, and apparently whoever's been monitoring your digital footprint since you started researching Richard's charity event." She slid another document across the table. "Your internet search history, pulled from somewhere. Richard Martinez, Martinez Foundation, Riverside Country Club, AV equipment rental, even searches for how to replace presentation files." My hands were shaking as I looked at the evidence of my own planning. Who has access to this kind of information? That's what worries me. This level of surveillance and coordination suggests either law enforcement resources or someone with serious technical capabilities and a very personal interest in destroying Richard Martinez. Sarah's phone buzzed, and her expression darkened as she read the message. "David, we need to move. Now." "What's wrong?" I asked, but she was already gathering the documents. "They just raided your apartment. 45 minutes after Richard's arrest, they executed a search warrant for your garage rental." She looked at me grimly. "Someone convinced them you were running a sophisticated harassment campaign, possibly with co-conspirators." My laptop. My research files. 3 years of documentation that would make it look like I'd been stalking Richard instead of just trying to survive his negligence. "But you said I was just a witness." "That was before someone fed them evidence that you've been systematically documenting multiple tenants' complaints, photographing properties across the city, and coordinating with unknown parties to time tonight's revelation with federal arrests." Sarah's phone rang, and she answered immediately. "What did they find?" I could hear the tinny voice on the other end but couldn't make out words. Sarah's face went white. "They found what?" she said sharply. David grabbed my arm. "We're leaving. Right now." "What did they find in my apartment?" I demanded as we hurried toward the car. Sarah was still on the phone, but she covered the receiver long enough to answer. "Surveillance equipment. Professional-grade cameras and recording devices that you definitely didn't put there." My mind reeled. Someone had planted surveillance equipment in my apartment, equipment that would make it look like I was running some kind of elaborate spy operation against Richard. Whoever had been helping me tonight hadn't been helping me at all, they'd been setting me up. "Sarah," I said as we reached the car, "who else knew about tonight? Who else had access to my evidence files?" She ended her call and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "That's what we're going to find out. But first, we need to figure out why someone wanted Richard Martinez destroyed badly enough to frame you for doing it." As we drove away from the diner, I realized my revenge had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. And it might destroy my entire life in the process. The burner phone Sarah handed me felt like holding a live grenade. "Answer it," she said grimly as we sat in her car outside a 24-hour gas station. "It's been ringing for 5 minutes straight." I pressed accept with trembling fingers. "Hello." Finally. The voice was electronically distorted, like something from a movie. "I was beginning to think you didn't appreciate what I've done for you tonight." My blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching Richard Martinez destroy people for a lot longer than you have. Your little graduation day heartbreak was just the catalyst I needed." Sarah was frantically setting up recording equipment, her laptop screen showing sound waves as the voice continued. "You used me," I said, anger cutting through my fear. "You planted surveillance equipment in my apartment, hacked the AV system, fed evidence to the FBI. I gave you everything you wanted. Martinez is finished. His reputation, his business, his freedom, all gone. You should be thanking me. I'm about to be charged with conspiracy in a federal investigation." A laugh that sounded like static. "Only if they can prove you knew about my involvement. Which you didn't, until right now." David was taking photos of Sarah's equipment set up from the front seat, documenting everything. They'd clearly done this before. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing. You were perfect exactly as you were, angry, desperate, and completely unaware you were being guided. Every search you made, every plan you formed, every contact you reached out to. I just helped things along." The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Maria's cousin Rosa. She didn't just happen to need extra servers. Rosa's been documenting Martinez's treatment of service workers for 2 years. Very dedicated woman, very angry about how he treats people like her. And Danny. The AV tech. Danny's girlfriend really was screwed over by Martinez's housing violations. I just made sure he was the one working tonight's event instead of his brother. Sarah was typing furiously on her laptop, probably trying to trace the call. She caught my eye and mouthed, "Keep talking." "Why Richard specifically?" I asked. "What did he do to you?" "Wrong question. Ask me who I am." "Fine. Who are you?" "I'm someone who learned a long time ago that guys like Martinez only understand consequences when they're public and permanent. Someone who's been building cases against slumlords like him for years." My stomach dropped. "Your law enforcement." "Was. Until I got tired of watching people like Martinez buy their way out of accountability." The distorted voice paused. "Your graduation day was perfect timing. I'd been monitoring his tenants' communications for months, waiting for the right catalyst. Your anger gave me the emotional hook I needed to make this personal. So everything tonight was a federal operation disguised as personal revenge. Martinez's arrest was always going to happen tonight. I just made sure it happened in the most humiliating way possible, with evidence that would stick in the public consciousness. Sarah was shaking her head frantically, pointing at her screen. The trace wasn't working. The surveillance equipment in my apartment, I said. That's going to make me look like someone was using you without your knowledge. Which is exactly what happened. The voice was getting fainter, like the signal was weakening. Don't worry. You'll be fine. The real evidence against Martinez comes from federal wiretaps and financial records. Your personal documentation was just theatrical enhancement. Wait, I started, but the line was already dead. Sarah stared at her laptop screen for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read. What? I asked. The call was routed through 17 different servers across 4 countries, she said quietly. Whoever that was, they're not just some rogue ex-cop with technical skills. David turned around from the front seat. Sarah, show her the other thing. What other thing? Sarah reluctantly pulled up another document on her screen. It was a news article, dated 6 months ago, FBI agent killed in housing corruption investigation. The agent's photo made my heart stop. I recognized her face from Richard's social media posts. She was in the background of a charity photo from last year's foundation gala, just another guest in an evening gown. She'd been investigating Richard for months before she died. And someone was continuing her work. The news article felt like a punch to the gut. Agent Patricia Hayes, 34, killed in a car accident while investigating a network of corrupt landlords and city officials. The photo showed a woman with kind eyes and a determined expression, someone who dedicated her life to protecting people like me from people like Richard. She was getting too close, Sarah said quietly. The official report called it an accident, but the timing was suspicious. 3 days before she died, she requested warrants for Richard's financial records. I stared at the screen, pieces clicking into place. Someone finished her investigation. Someone with access to her files, her evidence, and a very personal reason to see Richard destroyed. David's voice was grim. The question is whether they're friend or foe. My phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number, *, check your email. Everything you need to clear your name. *. With shaking hands, I opened my email app. There was a message from an encrypted account with a subject line that made my heart race, the truth about Richard Martinez. The email contained dozens of attachments, FBI surveillance footage showing Richard accepting envelopes of cash from city inspectors, recorded phone calls where he laughed about keeping those tenants in line, financial records proving he'd been skimming money from his own charity foundation. But the final attachment was what made me gasp out loud, a video message from Agent Patricia Hayes, recorded just days before her death. If you're watching this, her voice was tired but determined, it means something happened to me before I could finish this investigation. Richard Martinez and his network of corrupt officials have destroyed countless lives through negligence, bribery, and intimidation. The evidence in this file should be enough to bring them all down. She paused, looking directly into the camera. To whoever continues this work, remember that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else. The video ended, and I felt tears streaming down my face. Agent Hayes had died trying to protect people like me. Someone had spent months orchestrating tonight's perfect storm of justice, using my anger as the catalyst but ensuring I'd be protected when the dust settled. Sarah's phone rang, and she answered immediately. After a brief conversation, she hung up with a smile I hadn't seen all night. The surveillance equipment in your apartment? It was Hayes' original investigation setup, installed months ago with proper warrants. Someone just reactivated it to make it look suspicious. She grinned. You're officially a witness, not a suspect. The evidence against Richard is solid, and your personal documentation actually helps prove a pattern of tenant abuse. 3 weeks later, I stood outside the courthouse watching Richard Martinez get led away in handcuffs for the second time. 23 years for bribery, fraud, and racketeering. His charity foundation had been a front for money laundering, and half the city council was under investigation. The mysterious voice never contacted me again, but I kept Agent Hayes' email address in my phone contacts. Sometimes late at night, I'd start to type messages I'd never send, thank you notes to a dead woman whose sacrifice had saved my life, and to whoever had honored her memory by finishing her work. I never did find out who my anonymous ally was, but it didn't matter. Richard Martinez had stolen my graduation day, but in the end, he'd given me something better, the knowledge that justice might be slow, but it's patient, methodical, and absolutely certain. Some revenge is best served by people who know exactly how to cook it.